Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Clausten,
Here.
Representative Lawley,
Here.
Representative Obermuller,
Here.
Representative Provenza,
She's here. She's in the bathroom.
and Chairman Northrup.
Here. All right. Welcome, Level Up. We're glad that you're here. As you can see, we're still getting our act together, but we're getting close. So,
I have my act together.
yeah. Well, I'm not saying she doesn't have her act together. I didn't say
For the
that.
record.
I'm saying that we are not getting our act together. There we go. Okay. So we welcome you guys here. Would anybody from Level Up like to speak or have anything to say, or you're just here to watch, participate? Participate. All right. All right. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
State
members
your
of the
name.
committee. So I'm Robin Grandpré with the Wyoming Department of Education. I'm Level Up Coordinator, and we're just really excited to have Level Up here with us. They're made up of outstanding educators from across the whole state, District Teachers of the Year, Wyoming Teachers of the Year, principals, Milken Award winners, and Presidential Award winners in math and science teaching. So really great group here today, and hope that you'll have a chance to interact with them over the next few days.
Excellent. We thank you.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
thank
Chair.
you for being here and looking forward to the interaction. Thank you. Okay, first bill up is House Bill 35, daycare certification requirements. Representative Heiner. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and Level Up. I feel honored that they're here, and I congratulate them for taking interest in what we do here. I appreciate their efforts to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk to the committee. My name is Scott Heiner, Representative Scott Heiner from House District 18, which is in the southwest part of Wyoming. So Mr. Chairman, I bring to you House Bill 35, which is some adjustments to the daycare regulations and some exemptions. So with your approval,
Please go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I'll enter into that. Many families in Wyoming lack accessible childcare, and it's a barrier to parental employment, especially for mothers. When childcare is available, it can lead to greater financial stability for families and overall economic growth for communities. Small communities in my district, some of them with a population of less than 1,000, have trouble having daycare facilities for their children. One in particular, one community only has one daycare facility available, and that daycare facility has decided they are going to close their doors. There's no other options, and that's when I got involved and visited with them and asked them to hold on just a little bit, see if we can make this a little bit better so that they can continue, because there was no other option in this small community for daycare. In rural and small communities, available childcare options are often few and far between. In Wyoming, more than 34% of families live in a childcare desert. Now, I need to define what a childcare desert is. A childcare desert is defined as a census tract with at least 50 children under the age of 5, where either there are no options or there are 3 times the number of children as there are spaces available. And 34% of Wyoming are classified as daycare deserts. So that's pretty amazing. Lack of opportunities for mothers and families to care for their children so they can go to work or to school. Access challenges have forced many parents to change jobs, reduce their hours, or quit altogether. Parents working non-traditional hours, which means early mornings, late evenings, or weekends, have fewer options. In Wyoming during 2021, 19% of student parents canceled plans to attend school during COVID to care for someone whose arrangements could not be arranged for daycare. The coronavirus pandemic shone a spotlight on childcare crisis. The Wyoming Department of Family Services reports that between 2017 and 2021, Wyoming lost 89 childcare facilities. To put that in context, that is 13% of our childcare facilities we lost. While urban counties like Laramie County only lost 4%, the loss in rural counties and communities was much more drastic, with, such as Niobrara, which lost 66% of their available childcare. Some other counties like Bighorn, Fremont, Washakie, and Uinta counties lost anywhere from 27 to 33% of their available childcare facilities. So a childcare desert are disproportionately in low-income urban, but very prevalent in rural communities. In cities, daycares tend to be concentrated in wealthier neighborhoods. With inflation at a 40-year high, many parents are facing a dilemma. They can't find childcare, but they can't afford to stay home. So improving childcare is a need not only in Wyoming, but throughout the United States. And we saw during the COVID, a lot of money was put out there to try to prop up daycare. But this is an effort to try to alleviate some of the rules and regulations for those very small daycare facilities, such as the one in this community that I represented. So there are some exemptions already for daycare licensure. And this bill is to try to expand on that. So some of the exemptions right now, and I'll read through the list. If you're caring for more than 2 children who aren't related to you, you need to be licensed. And it is considered a crime to operate a child care facility without a license if you're not exempt. So the exemptions are: 1, a legal parent or legal relative's care of a child, doesn't have to be licensed. Number 2, occasional care of a neighbor or friend's child if the person providing the care does not regularly engage in the activity. Number 3, parents exchanging care on a cooperative basis, that would be without pay. Number 4, child care provided by a person employed to come to the home of the child's parent or guardian, such as a nanny. Number 5, child care facilities providing care for no more than 2 unrelated children. And 6, foster care facilities supervised by the state or local government. So if going into the bill, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the meat of the bill is on page 2, where we add another exemption, create another exemption, and it's part-time preschool facilities enrolling fewer than 8 minors who are all over 36 months old, or fewer than 10 minors who are all over 48 months old. So what we did is we looked at the supervisor-child ratios that are allowed in regulation and stayed within that criteria. Now, some sideboards we put on there is that they can't administer medications, they cannot prepare food for the minors, the minors have to be potty trained or be able to use the toilet with that and not wear diapers. These minors cannot be more than 10 hours a week in a preschool, and they adhere to all applicable local laws, health laws, safety laws, and fire codes or regulations. So some pretty narrow sideboards, but this situation, if we have this additional exemption, then this child care facility in this community that I'm representing will be able to stay in service and will be exempt from licensure, and we'll be able to continue with the way it is right now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and stand for any questions.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Heiner, I'm just looking at section 3, which gives us the effective date. And I guess I'm just kind of confused on it. So, and if you can help me just wrap my head around it. It says that sections 2 and 3 of this are effective immediately. So we're going to exempt everything, and we're going to give the department the time to do this, but you're not instituting the meat of the bill until this July. Is that correct? Am I making sure that I'm understanding that 100%?
Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, yes, what it does is it becomes immediate for the actions, but it gives the time a little bit for the department to come up with putting this in their rule book. You know, as we all know, it takes a little while to get it into a rule book once we pass a statute. So we don't want to create any undue burden upon the department.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Representative. I have recognized that, and this may be a question for the department. I know you've worked with them through the interim on this. My biggest question on this is that enough time between now and July that they would be able to promulgate all the rules necessary to implement this? And if you can answer that, great. Otherwise, I can wait for the director.
Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I would prefer to defer on that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Heiner. This is a very important topic, especially in the lives of women who work. And I appreciate you bringing it and bringing the bill. I only have really one question, and that's related to their, on page 2, line 15, the 10-hour-a-week limit. So I'm sure there's thinking behind that, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to explain that, because I'm trying to think of situations. I mean, it certainly would help, but there are many situations it would be insufficient to meet the needs you've described. So how do you kind of line those two up?
Go ahead, Representative Heiner, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, what we tried to do is stay under the, within the regulations of the federal guidelines. And as a part-time preschool, it had pretty tight limits on how much time you could have them in the preschool. So that's the main criteria for keeping it at such a low level. Now it's by week, not by day. So it may just be that 10 hours can be divided up however it needs to be.
Thank you.
Representative Provenza had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, the subparagraph E, so applicable to local health, safety, and fire codes or regulations, do you know kind of what our state statutes have as like a ground line, and then for maybe local areas? I know in Laramie, in my hometown, we've had conversations about like egress windows. So not being able to get out of a facility because there's not windows to exit a building. So I'm curious if you have, I don't know that as well, so I'm hoping maybe you do, given some of your background.
Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, every community has a different planning and zoning commission, and they have different rules and regulations. So to talk specifically about one community versus another would be difficult for me at this time. But yeah, as far as egress, some of those code regulations, they all fall under national code, but then they have opportunities to manipulate those however they see fit based on the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that's why this is a very broad statement, because depending on what community you're in, you have to adhere to those regulations of that community.
Representative Obermueller, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, actually it's on line 3. I'm having trouble with this first paragraph, actually, trying to understand how these 8 and 10 students relate. In line 3, the word "or" makes more sense to me when I put the word "and" in there. So I'm missing something about how to understand this paragraph. Can you help me out on that?
Please go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller. I don't know if I could use a prop in here.
Yes, you can.
Rules and regulations, there's a broad chart here of what you can have in the staff to child ratios. And it depends on the age. The age of children birth to 12 months, you can have 1 staff to every 4 children. 12 months to 24 months, you can have 1 staff to, I'm sorry, I can't see very well, 5 children, and it goes on down that list. And so this paragraph in page 2 adheres to that you can only have up to 8, if they're 36 months old, you can have 8 children per staff. But if they're 4 years old, you can have 10 children per staff. So as I said before, Representative Obermueller, it's very tight boundaries, and we're trying to fall within these regulations as we wrote this exemption. So you can have, if they're all within this 36-month-old, you can have this many, but if they're all within the 48-month-old, you can have 2 extra. Now, question naturally comes up, what if I have mostly 36-year-olds and 1 or 2? I don't know the answer to that. That may be a question we ask the department, because I'm not sure, Representative.
All right, thank you.
Representative Brown, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again,
Just another one. Representative Heiner, at the very beginning, you mentioned that your daycare facility is closing, but I didn't hear why. And so my question is are they closing because the onerous regulation process? Are they closing because they can't have enough kids in there? What is the purpose of them closing? And ultimately, the question that I'm trying to get to is, I'm guessing that this bill particularly fixes your problem, but does it solve any other problems throughout the state with other communities that are facing similar issues? Or are we narrowly tailoring this so much for your community that we may be exempting others out?
Representative Heiner, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, they are closing because there's so many rules and regulations, and they're changing and becoming more and more rigorous. I've got to hear somewhere all the changes in this past year. It's all the contingency plans you have to have for different avenues that, the safety requirements, the standard operating procedures that you have to have. It becomes pretty onerous if you're only doing this part-time as a mother with a couple of your own children. You want to bring a few more children in for a little extra revenue. So that is the overriding concern, is the rules and regulations are getting very difficult for this.
Representative Berger, you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, those regulations that you're going by are the federal regulations, correct?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Representative
Chairman, Representative Berger, yes, they are the federal regulations that are getting more onerous, but our department has to follow those regulations as well. So that begins elsewhere outside the state and filters into the state for that reason.
So then, I guess my last question is.
Go ahead, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, is, do you recommend that we go by those guidelines, or you recommend maybe we set our own guidelines?
Representative
Would there be
Heiner.
a need to do that, or?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger,
Yeah.
in order to get we all fall under the purview of the federal guidelines. Whether we set guidelines that are more stringent than the federal guidelines, that's up to this body as well as the department. But in order to be able to govern ourselves, we have to fall within the guidelines that are given to us. And so we have to be careful that we don't overstep our boundaries.
Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I think too many standards seems to be a common theme today, but, just my question comes in with the 10 hours for a week, and it says does not prepare food for the minors. I mean, if some of these kids are here for 3, 4, 5, 10 hours, what do they do about food? I mean, do we have any control of that, or is that another one of these federal standards?
Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, if they're there for that long, we cannot prepare food for the minors, but they can still bring a little snack box. It says they does not prepare food for the minors, and there's regulations for preparing food in a home for children that are not of yours. But Cheerios, I can imagine that they could bring their own little package of Cheerios.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking at the repeals in terms of, or what doesn't apply, so 14-4-101 through 111, 108 deals with like suspension, revocation, renewal. And so this wouldn't apply here. And so my question is, if there's a concern about there's an operation happening that is not helpful for children, it's harmful, who would then be responsible for any investigation, oversight, or potentially revoking their ability to do their home daycare?
Representative Heiner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Provenza, that where they're exempt from licensure, then it would be fall upon the parents to file a complaint if something was not appropriate, and then it would be investigated at that point.
Follow up?
Who would they file that complaint with?
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, maybe you. No, it would probably go through the city at that point. And then they could also ask the Department of Health to come in if there's something serious like that. So there's many avenues for that.
Further questions from the committee?
I have one.
Go ahead, Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On 13, we've been talking about the certification requirement exemptions on that these sections then do not apply. So were those sections above and beyond federal standards, or how do we manage to have those sections not apply when the overriding regulations are federal regulations? I'm not quite sure I understand where these fit into that picture. Were they above and beyond what federal regulations were requiring?
Representative Heiner, we're on page 1, line 13.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, I think I'd like to defer to the department.
Thank you.
They are so much more knowledgeable than I am.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Further questions from committee? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this might be another question for committee. Will these facilities be able to still do like background checks on their employees that they're considering for hire?
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, the way this is set up is probably won't have anyone for hire. It's more of a mother in her home who has some children of her own and allows other children within these boundaries to come in and be with them for just a short period of time. So we don't anticipate any staff.
Further questions? Thank you. All right, Representative, well, we're going to turn it over to the public, and we'll start with the department first, if they would, please. Or any elected officials that would like to talk. Thank you. Please state your name for the record, and we'll ask you questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt. I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. With me today, I have Roxanne O'Connor, and she is the Senior Administrator for the Support Services Division, which includes childcare. And I hope the committee may indulge me a little bit with maybe some background information and how we do this as a lead up to some
Please
of the
do.
questions. So we have what is a very old statute around child serving facilities, which includes child care, and it also includes facilities that provide youth services like group homes, residential treatment centers. So we have one big statute that kind of encompasses all of that. And then from there, we have authority to promulgate rules based on the type of facility it is. So around child care, the definition of child care has really changed substantially since those laws were written, but that's the statute to which you are referring, are those set of types of facilities. We then write rules based on the type of provider it is. So we have different rules for what we call substitute care. Those are those facilities taking care of youth probably 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, compared to childcare, which is a variety of different types of providers. We might have in-home small care providers. We may have in-home a little bit larger with up to 15 children providers. We may have larger childcare facilities, which is oftentimes what you think of when you think about some of the major providers in your communities. We also have entities like the Boys and Girls Club that provide after-school care, not necessarily traditional child care as we see it. and then there's an exemption for them. I think the first thing before we go a lot further is just that this conversation really highlights potentially a conversation to have about that group of statutes. Because how we do business in this day and age and the needs that parents have and the willingness of providers has changed very much since the days those statutes were originally written. So I do think this conversation plus the conversation we had a few years ago around the Boys and Girls Club type organization really does merit maybe a further discussion through the interim. I certainly have not discussed this internally, but that's an idea that we are considering. So going then to this idea about state rules or regulations or standards compared to federal. The Department of Family Services receives federal dollars through the Child Care Development Block Grant, CCDBG. And that is quite a bit of money that comes to us for a variety of reasons that have to do with early care and education. So a little bit broader than just childcare specifically, but really looking at a lot of tenets around the provision of some sort of service to a child, whether that be preschool, extended care, something that you think of in the tradition of daycare, where a parent goes to work, drops their child off, at the end of the day comes and picks them up. In that, we provide assistance to qualifying families to receive a match of federal dollars and state general fund dollars. So we use that block grant to provide funding assistance for eligible families to access childcare services. So it's one of the many benefits that we provide, primarily through the federal government, but in this case, there is a general fund match. So in order for a child care provider to receive child care assistance on behalf of a parent or a family, they must meet the rules that are established by the feds. So if they choose not to receive child care assistance, then they do not need to meet quite the exact number of rules that the federal government requires, but that's then where the statute comes into play a little bit more. So when we're exempting, what we're primarily exempting from is the statute, not federal law, because you can be exempt from providing the service. But if you want the financial assistance, you still have to meet the federal criteria. So it gets a little bit woven in again is a good reason why I think we can evaluate the way that the current statute is written and are there better ways to differentiate. Some of the enforcement questions to Representative Provenza's question is that when we receive some sort of call or complaint in regard to a provider who maybe is acting what we would say illegally, they're not licensed, they're serving a lot of children, et cetera, we do not have enforcement capability for that. What our practice is we will go visit with that particular provider. We will ascertain whether or not the complaint is legit. And then if it is, we refer it to the county attorney. And it does become very much a local matter. The jurisdiction then sits with the county attorney as to what or how they should proceed. So that is the mechanism that's available. The question about what's in the rules, what's not, what gets included in terms of, for example, background check was also a question, really is a very tricky question. And it's one that we struggle with regularly. And from the Department of Family Services, we want children to be safe where they are. We want children to be safe at home. We want children, if they're in a home, to be safe as well. But what we also recognize is sometimes some of the regulatory burden, as is the case here, can be prohibitive in regard to providing a small basic service. We don't want to get in the way of that either. So we continually go back and forth with what is enough safety? What is the minimum standard? What should it be? Is exempting the best way to get that service available, even though there may be some risk because there isn't a requirement to do some of the things that we would expect otherwise. Some of those things are like CPR training, the safety plan, as the representative had mentioned, background checks, those types of things that we all look at as a very important component of child care services. But in regard to this particular piece of legislation, the amount of time that the child is with the provider is pretty minimal. I mean, yes, the child could be with them for 10 hours a day. I would expect in practice, it really won't be a 10-hour day preschool environment. It would be spread over the course of the week. But it is a real situation, and we have not found a place where we're entirely comfortable. But we do recognize that the service is crucial. As was mentioned, the number of childcare providers that we lost through COVID does, I think, at its very core, put children at risk because parents are forced to place children in situations that are not safe. It creates a lack of opportunity for parents to go to work. And certainly that's an important part of dealing with poverty or any of those economic situations the family will be facing. And so that access component is really important to us. So we will continue through every piece of legislation like this to try to balance that, to find some place where we're recognizing access is crucial, balance with safety, and then talking about quality. While a child is there, what kind of quality services are they receiving? And certainly through technical and assistance and a lot of other resources available through the state, we can address some of that as well. So that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is really kind of an overview of how we approach this idea of childcare, preschool, early care and education. You can call it a lot of things, but at the end of the day, we want children to be safe. We recognize that there's some balance to that. In closing, what I'd also like to remark is that this is really what we think is only going to affect 12 providers. So I think Representative Brown, you had asked, is this a one person or one entity issue, or is this a little bit larger? We're seeing about 12 providers throughout the state that would be impacted by this particular piece of legislation. That's not to say more wouldn't come on as a result of some of the relaxations, but right now that's what we're looking at. Stand for any questions.
Excuse me, get my mic on, there we go. Go ahead, Representative Brown, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schmidt, just out of curiosity, you said that there's a state match that comes out of the general fund. Just out of curiosity, what's that match?
Go ahead. Director Schmidt or?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, it is $5 million, but we pulled down about another $7 million in federal funds. So it's a $12 million available for child care assistance. And I'm looking to somebody who really keeps track of the numbers.
That's good, that's good. Further questions? Go ahead, please comment.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, if I may add to that. So on a yearly basis, we receive about $13.8 million in federal funds for the Child Care Development Block Grant. And then within that, there's $5.6 million that we're required as a state to match, either through matching funds or through maintenance of effort.
Got it. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. How will it affect those 12 facilities or groups that you were talking about? How?
Go ahead, Director. Or, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, again, Roxanne O'Connor, Support Services Senior Administrator for Department of Family Services. Representative Berger, it would exempt them from many of our licensing rules. And so I can go into some specifics, but as Director Schmidt mentioned, those are our CPR, our some basic health and safety, some food allergy procedures. It would really just exempt them from having some of the procedures that a licensed provider would have.
Follow up?
So then like deregulate?
Go ahead, Roxanne.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, yes, it would deregulate them. So where they are now under some sort of level of requirement for rules, those 12 providers would no longer have to meet what are in our current rules.
Further questions for the committee, for the department? Anybody? All right, you'll still be around. We'll ask you if we have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other department, education, want to comment on it or not? Nope, okay. We'll take comments from the public. Anybody from the public? Come up and fill the seats up, please.
Thank you, Chairman Northrup and committee. My name is Brittany Montgomery. I am here with Level Up. I'm the 2022 Wyoming Teacher of the Year. But specifically right now, I'm going to talk to you as a mama. And I have 3 babies. And I actually had a baby this year. And again, I believe you're Heiners from my district, and I have a letter for you. It's from a student, not me. So anyways, it's very hard to find childcare. As they said, you are limited based on age. Again, in a community, if you have, 10 babies within, a certain amount of time, who's taking care of them, right? I'm a teacher. I had 5 days maternity leave, and who's going to take care of, I need to be with students. That's my job. And so I appreciate this so much that we're looking into this. Specifically, I'd like to look at page 2, line 9. I believe it was Representative Clouston, you mentioned, does not prepare food for the minors. I will say another thing we see is daycares don't provide preschool. So I'm paying for daycare. But then I also have to pay for preschool, which is separate. And also you have to find out how to get them there. And I'm working, right? So that's another thing. And so mine does prepare food. So I don't know if that would be exempt because of other things. So that was one thing I did notice. And then the other one, 11, requires the minors to be trained and able to use a toilet and not wear diapers. Now, another lens I have is my son was born under the spina bifida umbrella. Completely cognitively there, but he will never have that bowel control. Therefore, he would not be allowed to attend preschool. So, and we actually did find this complicated when we were looking at preschool. And again, I don't know how this works as far as the exemptions and things, but I just would like to have some awareness of the language and just be very sensitive that there are children out there that don't necessarily match and fit this. So, and with that, I stand for any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? No question. Thank you for coming, Brittany. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Laura Lyons, and I have had the pleasure of being an educator for the last 18 years and a mother for the last 21. And I just want to let you know I'm in favor of House Bill 35. I am from Niobrara County that Mr. Heiner spoke of, and we lost 66% of our daycares, and that has a huge impact on my community. My husband and I are actually both teachers, and we had twin daughters. And finding daycare for 2 children that are of that baby age, which they spoke on those numbers, you can only have so many babies, was very difficult. And my husband and I had hard decisions to make on whether we would continue our passion in education or one of us would stay home. And then I want to talk on something else in regards to this, and that is when daycares are impacted, it affects something that is huge in Wyoming right now, which is teacher recruitment and retention. We're losing teachers and we're not able to fill positions in Wyoming. And I do believe, especially in Niobrara County, we're unable to fill support staff positions and sometimes teaching positions because we don't have the daycare facilities for people to be able to have a safe place for their children to go. I just want to reiterate that I am in favor of this, and I yield and stand for questions.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody have any questions for Laura? Thank you for coming. Anybody else like to talk? Just fill up the chairs if you would, please. Everybody that would like to talk, there's 3 chairs, pile in them, and when one's out, fill it up. Thank you.
Members of the board, Mr. Chairman, I'm Lindsay Adam. I'm a teacher in Pinedale, and I'm also a foster mom. I've had 19 kids in the last 4.5 years. Most of them, we take the older kids that are beyond daycare age, but we have had placements of young kiddos, and it's very, very difficult to go from not needing childcare at all to I need childcare tomorrow and I need it all day long. That being said, the intent of this bill is really only to fill that tiny after-school gap for kids who are 3 years and up. And I'm in favor of that because that will just create more competition. If we have a few more mothers working out of their home, they already have kids, and then they can bring in a few more, that might help a lot of people stay in the workforce. It's not going to help anybody who's working full-time with an infant, but it might help those that have kids in an all-day preschool or in kindergarten. And I am in favor of relaxing regulations on those small mom and pop childcare facilities if it means there will be more. Thank you. I stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions for Lindsay? You don't have any problems with there being 10 kids in a group or 8 in the other group?
It is a little bit scary, but it's not what's not already happening. Even the licensed facilities in Pinedale where I live, you can't get in unless you've been on the waiting list for a year. So if you get a surprise kiddo, or if you just move to town, there's one facility that will take you, and it's way understaffed. It's very crowded. It's very noisy. It's very stinky. And that's the only option. So I would like to see more competition in my town of open, loving homes. That would give me as a mother the ability to say, your home sketches me out. I'm going to choose another one. Without that competition, then I have no choices.
Great. Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Brown. You had a question.
Not a question, just thank you for fostering.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Thank you, Lindsay. When the mic
There it
works.
goes. It wasn't turning green. If it was my kid, that he wouldn't tell. I have 2 boys that are colorblind, so green is not something they can see. I am Abby Brew. I am a special education teacher in Goshen County, but I am speaking not on behalf of a teacher, but I serve on the Board of Education for one of our local preschools, actually, that is governed within our church. And so first and foremost with that, we are falling into that 8 and 10 guideline because when COVID hit, just with people being ill and not having enough staff members, we had to drop to that number so that we only had to have 1 adult in our system. And so our numbers dropped. So I would like to see this bill pass because I also feel like it would open up more opportunity for preschools within our small town as well. Also, I have 4 children of my own, and last year they were all in 4 different locations because there weren't there weren't daycare openings for 2 of them at the same place. And so I had kids in 2 different daycares. For the first year of one of their lives, they were in 4 different places because there wasn't an opening in a preschool or a daycare facility, and I had to rely on some stay-at-home moms to rotate my kids through. And so as a parent, that was extremely challenging, knowing that my job is to educate our youth, but I wasn't providing the best opportunity for my own kids at home. Thank you. I stand for any questions.
Questions for Abby? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess the one thing I'm just struggling with a little bit is, like we have a responsibility for kids. So here you are, you're a mom, you're a teacher, and we're gonna let these children be going somewhere where they're not licensed, certified, no background checks. That's really my only hesitation on this. So how do you or the other people in the audience, how do you feel about that aspect of this?
Yeah, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Abby.
Representative. For me, I truly would bank on my mom instinct. And when I go into a facility or I go into someone's home, meeting them, I knew their children. And I truly think that I would trust them if I didn't have that feeling that I wouldn't trust that I would allow them to keep my kids. And I would never hesitate for a second to contact DFS or our local law enforcement if I had any issues.
Go ahead, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under this bill, that section that I'd asked about earlier, where you have the 8 children and the 10 children, what does that section mean to you in terms of how many children you could have in a home with a mix of different ages?
Go ahead, Abby.
And I'm not 100% sure, but in my understanding, as far as serving on a board, if there were more than that, there would have to be multiple adults. And so if you keep a number within certain limits, that's the amount of adults you have to have in that facility so that's what
I think department's going to answer.
there you go.
Oh, good.
Please
Good,
do.
Because I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman, Roxanne O'Connor, Support Services Senior Administrator, DFS, Representative Obermuller. If we have a mixed age group, we go by the youngest child. So the youngest child in care, let's say in this example, would be 3. And so we would only allow for up to 8 because the youngest child is 3 years old.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Further questions? We're getting them. Thank you, Abby. Yes, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, my name is Kara Hill. I am a business teacher at Lingle Fort Laramie High School. I teach 6th through 12th grade, and my most important role is as a mama of 2 children. To me, looking at it from a little bit different perspectives, one perspective I see is I've actually witnessed firsthand secondary students, even as young as middle school students, trying to fill the need to care for younger siblings. And unfortunately, in our area, there are a lot of lower income families that bank on every cent that they can get. So to put the middle school and the high school students, who should be hopefully being a child instead of a caregiver, to put them in a tough spot, that makes it very difficult. Then to take off that hat and to look at it from a business perspective, typically if there's more competition, you get a better quality product. So with that in mind, knowing that if I have multiple opportunities, I'm going to expect a better quality product, and to have a higher expectation for our children, I don't see how we could go wrong. So I do support this.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody have questions for her? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to comment besides the gentleman?
Mr. Chairman, you do have one online who would like to comment on this.
Okay, we'll queue him up.
Whenever
They'll be
you're
next
ready.
after this young man. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Tim Erdley, and I'm here as a dad. Thought I'd like to represent all of us fathers out there. And I am in favor of this bill. As I look back, as my wife and I started our young family, we both graduated from Laramie. I took a job teaching in Grable. Wonderful place, by the way, come visit. And when we got there, we're a long ways away from family, and we didn't, have family around to help us. My wife and I were both trying to establish our careers in Grable, and one of the most amazing things for us was when our neighbor approached us and said, "Hey, would you like me to watch your kid for that hour or so after school until you get home? I can step in and do that." And it was amazing. And if you could be there when I opened the door to pick up my kid and the smell of fresh baked bread is coming out, and even the relationship there with my son and our neighbor is just absolutely fantastic to this day. You'd think it was a grandparent and a kid, and it helped us out tremendously. And I feel that as long as we stay within these guidelines and these regulations that have been set forth at the top down, it's not deregulating everything. We're staying within those guidelines, yet opening the door for some people to help out in the community and for the community to help each other and support each other. I feel like this is a good move for our state and will help a lot of people out. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim.
With that, I yield and stand for questions.
Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you suggesting that we delete the section on the prepared food for minors?
Go ahead, Tim.
I actually turned to my friend and back here, Aaron, and I said, feed the kids. If the kids are hungry, you gotta feed them. I'm obviously using your best discretion as to what you're feeding them, but yeah, that fresh baked bread coming out of the oven was fantastic, and my kid's been pretty tough since eating that.
Further questions? Thank you, sir, for coming.
Thank you.
And there's a couple of us from Bighorn Basin, one from Warland and I'm from Powell, so.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Public comment? Going once?
Mr. Chairman, I've brought Taylor Allred into the room, so
Please.
he's ready to go, it looks
All
like.
right. Hi, Taylor.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate you letting me join remotely. Unfortunately, my work schedule prohibited me from making the trip over. I would like to testify, this is something that I've worked with Representative Heiner on because it affects my wife. I would love to answer some of the questions that you've had, but let me give a little bit of background. When we first moved to Cokeville, there was no preschool. There had been in the past. The lady that provided the preschool had enough. She stopped. She gave it up. Our two kids went through what's called a Joy School, our two youngest, and that's parents working together and to provide the preschool, and each mother would take a turn, and we would rotate. That's the way our children went through preschool, our younger two. During that time, there was multiple people that looked into opening a preschool, but because of the regulations and things that they had to abide by, they didn't do it. There was one that did it for 1 year, and she said, I can't do this anymore. So my wife looked at it. We looked at the struggles we had, and she wanted to provide a service to the community. This isn't something it isn't a moneymaker. I'll tell you, the first 2 years, figured it out, and she might have made 50 cents an hour. It was a lot of time, it was a lot of effort, but she enjoyed it. She enjoys working with the kids. She worked very closely with the kindergarten teachers to see what they wanted the kids to have coming into kindergarten. So it's something that she worked very closely with. But over the last 6 years as she's done this, rules and regulations, and I don't know, and I honestly don't care whether it's federal rules or it's state rules, it's that they've become more onerous, they've become prohibitive. She used to do 3 field trips a year. She'd take the kids over to the police department, the volunteer fire department, and to the local diner. Now, it was great for the kids. They'd go in, they'd get to meet the police chief, they'd get to meet the fire department, see them in their gear, get to know them. And we were talking about it last night, and she told me it was really good because when they first walked in, there was a little bit of fear in those kids' eyes. But as they talked, she got to know them, so those kids were comfortable. And so if there was an emergency at their house, and either the police or the fire department shows up to help, they understand that those people are there to help. It was a great thing. But because of recent rules that came in, we can't do that anymore. We could, I guess, but it makes it so extremely difficult to do that because she has to carry a binder with her. It doesn't matter that she has all the parents' phone numbers in her cell phone. That's not good enough. She has to carry a binder with emergency contact information, safety checks on the car in order to drive that mile over there. She has to have a sign-in out sheet to track everything. It really just makes it too much of a pain. So the kids no longer get that. Now we're looking at, and I know the director testified that there's roughly 12 preschools, whatever, that would be impacted by this. Maybe that's not a lot, but it's something that it provides a service. It provides something that the communities need. In our community, without our preschool, parents have to drive 45 minutes to an hour on good roads to get their kids to another preschool. So I would just say it's something that honestly we've looked at it, and if something doesn't give, we're done, and it leaves our community again without a preschool. I just want to say, as far as what rules it exempts from, I'm all in favor of have the background check. background check and CPR, I think that's important. We put an addition on our house specifically for the preschool. We made sure the state fire inspector was here. He went through everything, made sure everything was up to code as it needs to be. We're inspected every year on that. I think that's important, the safety aspect of it. Feeding kids, that was a question that was raised. I think that's an important one. That brings in a whole separate set of regulations for preparing food. It's a whole nother inspection. So for that reason, we don't provide food. The kids in our situation, they rotate around, and each day kids bring snacks for the class. They're prepackaged, things that way, the same as they would have to do at a school, at the elementary school, if they want to bring a treat, whatever. It's the same thing, but it's a whole nother set of regulations and inspections if you're going to feed kids. I love fresh made bread myself. I grew up, I loved coming home to the smell of fresh made bread. I think everybody would. But that's something that we've chosen to not do because of the other set of regulations and inspections that go with that. So I don't know, with that, I very much appreciate Representative Heiner working on this and Senator Dockstader and co-sponsoring it. It's something that, again, it may not impact a lot, but it does impact the smaller preschools like ours. Simply because as we look at the rules that we have to abide by, those rules make sense for large preschools. But for example, a new rule this year was there has to be a sign in and out sheet. The kids are tracked and teachers, if there's other teachers, every time they leave or enter a room. Well, in our situation, there's one room and a bathroom. That's what there is. But as part of the guidelines, she has to have a sign in and out sheet in her on the wall and in her book in order to track that. I mean, to me, that it doesn't make sense, but that's the rules that we have to abide by. That's the type of things that, again, I would say are onerous and just over the top that make it extremely difficult to continue to provide this service in our community. And that I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Anybody got questions for Mr. Allred? Thank you, sir, for testifying. Nice of you to show up on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and committee. I felt like I was uniquely qualified because I've taught for 28 years.
You have to tell us your name, Darcy.
Darcy Ostermiller from Pell,
I know
Wyoming.
you, yeah.
Yeah, we know each other. I've taught for 28 years. 7 of those, I had my own preschool. I was qualified in a dual special education and elementary degree, but the regulations, while I had the preschool, were rigorous and more rigorous than I have in my kindergarten classroom. And so as I think that you guys are very, very aware of safety, there were some things that had nothing to do with short-term care, such as preschool or after-school care. And the last thing I want to say is early childhood education is critical. If we could have more opportunities for kids to receive good interaction with other children, good basic literacy skills, I think that our state would benefit so greatly. We don't have universal preschool, and I think that if we had some smaller opportunities to educate our kids, it would help out kindergarten, it would help K through 12. So I stand for questions.
We agree. Questions for Darcy? Thank you for being here. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? All right, we'll close public comment. Representative Heiner, would you like to come up while we work the bill? Because there might be a question. All right, committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Brown, seconded by Lawley. On page 1, anybody have anything you'd like to comment or questions or amendments? Okay, we'll move to page 2, the meat of the bill. Anything anybody like to delete, add, or put in?
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman.
Ocean Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to entertain an amendment on page 2, line 9, that food may be prepared under the Wyoming Food Freedom Act.
That's interesting. Looking for a second.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Andrews, seconded by Obermuller for a Food Freedom Act on line 9. Would you like to discuss it? Anybody? Everybody understands the act?
So you want to speak first?
Do you want to speak about it? Do you want to tell us your reasoning?
Mr. Chairman, I think we heard the reasoning and testimony quite clearly.
It was the cookies and the bread, yes. Representative Provenza.
I think the reasoning is freedom.
Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Just a question for the bringer of the amendment. How would this interrelate to the other regulations that are in play in this area, which was the concern of some of the speakers here today?
And quite frankly, that might be a good question for department. If you'd like to come up and address that, that'd be great.
She missed the question. That's okay. We can repeat it.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Roxanne O'Connor, Department of Family Services. Representative Obermuller, do you mind repeating your question for me, please?
Representative Andrew, would you like to repeat your amendment for her and then?
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Essentially on page 2, line 9, inserting some language that would say that food could be prepared under the Wyoming Food Freedom Act.
Using those guidelines.
And
So,
Mr. Chairman, the question is that amenable under our
Under
current
DFS, right.
statute? Mr. Chairman, as far as we can research, yes, we'd have to look into that a little bit more, but right off the top of my head, I don't have any immediate concerns with that amendment.
Now we have more questions. Do you want to follow up or not?
No.
Okay. Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am all in favor of feeding the kids. When I read and hopefully maybe you can help us or somebody else on the committee, but it says authorizing, so the Wyoming Freedom Food Act here, it says authorizing the sale of certain homemade food items by parties. So,
Mr. Chairman.
I'm not sure how that applies. Do you know?
I was going to ask Roxanne to comment on that, but do you want to further comment?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, more discussion than it is a question. I think Food Freedom Act was for us to be able to sell out of our house. I don't think it actually goes into anything about being able to feed or, distribute food, internally. What I would be more concerned on is what applicability. I don't think, in my opinion, we need to put food freedom in here. I think what we could do is just strike do not prepare food for minors if that's what we want to do. But allowing it underneath the Food Freedom Act is actually, I think, is a step too far, because what if they have a can of peaches and they want to do peaches? Well, that's certainly not food freedom from Wyoming. If we're looking to feed the children, I think we need to expand it beyond the Food Freedom Act, Mr. Chairman.
Good point. Roxanne, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think Representative Brown's point is on point.
Okay. Representative Andrew Ocean Andrews, I'm sorry. Would you like to?
That's all right. I'm used to it.
I bet.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Representative Brown that just striking that language would definitely be a good idea. I thought maybe the Food Freedom Act would have some, sideboards for the liability aspect and all that. But if we can take care of it that way, I let's go ahead and do that.
So that's your motion is to strike.
Changing my motion just
And
to
motion
strike
on-
line.
Motion on the floor right now, so. So,
I withdraw my motion.
okay,
Amendment.
okay with second?
Yeah.
Okay, now go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we strike line 9 on page 2.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I
Uh,
have a question.
So do I. Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess my question here is, we're talking about these federal guidelines and federal funds. Are these parents, are they using federal funds or is this all private? So if it's private funds, do we really have to follow all these strict guidelines can we strike the food and other things on there?
Go ahead, Roxanne.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clouston, that's a really good distinction. And so it would depend on if the parents of the child are receiving child care assistance or subsidies. If this bill were to pass and these providers were exempted from licensing and they do not have children that accept child care assistance or that receive child care assistance, then those federal regulations would not apply.
Representative Brown, you had a question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess, so Representative Heiner and Roxanne, you guys worked this through the interim. You guys worked your tails off, and I've spoken with the director about it as well. This was originally put in the bill for a reason. I guess my biggest question is what was that reason? And then once we step away from that question is, if we remove this, are we jeopardizing the safety and security of our children? I will never forget Representative Wilson saying botulism for grandma, but boy, we don't want botulism for kids either. So what's the purpose and the idea behind putting this into the language?
Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Representative Brown, appreciate the comments. There was a reason that we put in the food, not preparing food because of the inspections that are required for food safety. Now, would that kill the bill if we took that out? We would have to do some more research, and if it does, we would have to bring that back as an amendment on the floor to put that clause back in if you choose to take it out right now. But we put that in there as a requirement so that we wouldn't have to have inspections in the home because they are preparing food in the home.
Okay, further questions, comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's perfect enough for me. The whole idea behind this is to try to deregulate a little bit. And if we strike this out, we're deregulating some, but we're re-regulating again. So I'll be a no vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
can I withdraw my second?
No. Any other more comments? All right, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, and the amendment was to strike line 9, does not prepare food for minors. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
No.
That amendment motion has failed. Any more? Anything else on page 2? Any amendments? Anything at all? Nothing? Page 3? All right, question on the bill. Wait, we got a Representative Provenza. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make some comments on the bill because I get it. Rules and regulations are onerous, they're a pain, they present a lot of problems, and sometimes they're not a great one-size-fits-all, right? I also understand how incredibly difficult it is to find childcare. In my household, we have conversations about that because we have to make choices around family and being in this legislature. And there's just not a ton of great options. And I came from a family that did home childcare. We did foster care. That was the home that I was brought up in. And I have a lot of respect for it and I appreciate it a lot. However, regulations are less onerous than maybe some of our worst nightmares coming true. And the reality is that our system is currently not working, that we don't have enough healthcare, that we don't fund healthcare, that we do not provide opportunities for young people in this state to have young families. And that, I think, requires a bigger discussion and a bigger reform than a small fix. And so I appreciate where this bill is going, but we deeply, deeply need to have a conversation about early childhood education, childcare, and we need to bring real solutions for this very real problem. And it's not to say that this isn't an attempt at that. I think there's merit to that, but I'm ready to get to work. And I want to do the big lift. And so I'm a no on this bill for that reason, Mr. Chairman.
All right, further comments on the bill? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a teacher as well. Just a comment here on the bill. I'm thinking the same things. I'm ready for the big lift, pre-K stuff. I don't want to deregulate anything that is going to hurt 12 facilities that are already being out there. But I guess I can't ask any more questions. I don't know how that's going to affect those facilities, deregulating them, or how it's going to affect the kids. Those are the questions I have still in my head. And right now, for me, I'm going to vote no because of that. But I'm ready to fight this fight and get the pre-K stuff going. We need it statewide. We need it in our rural communities. It is time. Okay? And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge us to really work hard. I guess we've got some other things coming up, but really make some decisions or work hard in our interim to fix this. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further comments? All right, we'll proceed to vote. Question's been called.
Hey, Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
No.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clauston,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
No.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
7 ayes and 2 noes.
All right, thank you very much. Our next bill is House Bill 176. It is Representative Harshman's bill. All right, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, DFS, for showing up. We appreciate it. Didn't hear a word I said. Could have been, didn't hear a word I said.
Mr. Chairman, all rise.
Yeah, all right. All right, we'll come back to order. Had a little recess there. We understand that you're presenting bills that replace else. Anybody else that would like to speak? I'm just gonna say we've got like 15, 20 minutes left before we go back into session, so not trying to say anything, but just keep it brief so we can move through this. Go ahead, Representative Harshman. We're on House Bill 176.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee here in the bill to this afternoon. I'll try to be brief. It's the title of the bill, the first title, K-12 Education Standards and Assessments. Probably could have named it Save the Elementary Teacher Act. But really it does three things. I think the first thing, it puts sideboards on the number of standards. The second thing, it talks about successful course completion as a measurement of these standards. And then finally, a little study and report on our state testing. And so members and Mr. Chairman, if you flip over to page 2 of the bill, 212304, right there on line 1, are duties of the state board. And you can see this adds a new paragraph F. But what you don't see is the existing language, right? So paragraph A really sets out the duties of the board, and one of those is to set standards, and it uses that same language in paragraph F. So this language of uniform student content performance standards for the Common Core knowledge, Common Core skills, is already language in our statute. So that's, I had a lady, an educator, former educator, call me actually up in your neck of the woods over the weekend, and we visited. And so this is not a new federal standards overreach or anything else. This is current statute, and it's just repeated in paragraph F. And then paragraph B, I think, has been deleted in that section. And then paragraph C talks about 9 years review on content standards, because it takes a year to do it, and then you have a 3-year rollout. And our old law used to be 3 years or 4 years. It was actually my little bill that changed that, because we had 9 content areas in those days, to do 1 a year basically and kind of control our costs. And that's probably been, gosh, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. I can't remember when we, I think paragraph D is repealed. And then I would encourage the committee in 212304, paragraph E, which is not in this bill right now, are the goals that are laid forth. And it's really was enlightening for me to read those goals again. So I think as members of this committee, which I really miss you all, miss this committee, it's really good to read those goals. So the new paragraph, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it talks about that this, start on line 5, the Common Core skills promulgated by the state board under paragraph A3. Well, that is those duties of the boards to set standards of this section shall be limited as follows. So we're going to put sideboards on the number of standards. And how are standards done? We bring teachers together. We bring subject matter experts. We bring first grade teachers. We've done it to ourselves. This isn't some nefarious federal black helicopter landed in Cheyenne and pow, we got almost 1,900 standards now. So it's been a process over 20 years, because you're dealing with people who care a lot. Well, we should have this. Well, let's include this too. This is really good. This is good. And so it's like a lot of things in our society, it's been more. And to the state board's credit, and I've emailed back and forth, talked to the state board chairman about this, they're going to take this on as well. If this bill doesn't make it to the finish line, breaks a leg and doesn't finish the race. So everybody recognizes this. So where should the sideboards be? And that's why I brought this bill, Mr. Chairman. And so members on Romanet 1 on line 9 really puts the emphasis on reading, language, arts, science, and math. So it says for grades kindergarten through 6, not more than 4 content standards for any one grade level shall be adopted for each of these areas: reading, language, arts, science, and math. And standards are like the big rocks, right? They should be the big rocks, and then your local districts, because we can't prescribe textbooks, right? It's our local school boards that decide the curriculum and the textbooks. We're not like the state of Texas. Every kid's got the same book. State Board of Education decides that, not in our state. Our founders said this is going to be local control. And so, but the standards should be big rocks that the local curriculum and the local teachers say, how are we going to crack open these 4 big rocks in first grade reading language arts? And they'll design their curriculum and instruction to accomplish that by the end of the school year. That's really the way it should be. Right now, a first grade teacher in Wyoming has 42 English language arts standards. Just 42 in English language arts. And that grew, I think, by a third over the last standards adoption process. So puts the emphasis back on those 3. And then it says the other 7 areas from career tech, fine and performing arts, computer science, all those things, just 1 per grade level. And a lot of those, they'll double up in grade bands. They might say K3 and they might have 3 for computer science or for foreign language, those kind of things. So, so what would that mean then in total numbers? And I mentioned we're just right at about 1,900 standards. The first grade teacher would go from 204-ish right now to about 31. Total K6 would go from about 800-ish to 133. Okay, so we would really bring this focus back. Now, this isn't all at once. This is in the bill, it's through the normal standards adoption process. So we're not going to go into a big blow up situation, but when we do math, we're going to have these sideboards. And then the next year, whatever that next standard is, whatever the schedule is, and it's laid out as well. Okay, Mr. Chairman and members, on line 18, Romanet 2 then talks about secondary grades 7 through 12. And you know, if you're a social studies teacher, it's kind of your lane. It's not like the first grade teacher who's teaching everything all day long. So in working in my conversations with folks, I originally had 4 and I increased this to 8. And so that would take these basic 7 through 12 standards from about 860-ish down to 480-ish, right? So not quite cut them in half, but reduce that. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, over on page 3, this is already, I think, in rules, but I don't think it hurts to have it in statute because it talks in here on Romanets 1 and 2 about a grade or grade band. What is a grade band? Well, some of our standards literally are all elementary, like K through 6. Some are K1, 2, you know, and so, and you get into high school, some are 9, 10. Others are less. So really it just sets the purpose of a grade band means a minimum of 2 grades, right? So it just, I don't think it hurts to have that in statute. And then, Mr. Chairman, the next section, duties of the Board of Trustees, this is the second part of the bill. All existing language on page 3 to the very end, and you say, and it talks about the district assessment system required in this paragraph to determine the various levels of student performance in all content areas. That's existing language. So my experience as a teacher, most of what, at least our district, so the teacher will give a grade, A, B, C, D, generally what we probably all experience. But then you go into the standards process and it's like a 4, 3, 2, or 1 or a 0. And so there's this double grading thing. And it's like, and I'm thinking of the first grade teacher with 210 standards. And I'm just going, perhaps we can change that a little bit. And so really, if you flip over to page 4, except for, and it puts an exception for the Wyoming Accountability, except as required by the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act. So that's the YTOP subjects, how they get tested, right? That's a totally different thing than the district assessment of these standards. So that's what line 1 on page 4, except for the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act, the statewide accountability system, the district assessment system may utilize course completion to measure student performance. The student passes a class, his local board certifies, hey, he's passed and met those standards. Because what happens to this district assessment system of standards? Have any of you ever seen it? No, nobody ever sees it. I mean, once the teacher marks it, it goes to a Google sheet at the district office and it sits there archived until reaccreditation comes around, and that's a checkbox. Show me that you got your district. Okay, check. Boom, and that's it. But none of that's not used. I mean, it's really about the teaching and the learning. This is just another step we got in there for, I would propose that, and I think you're going to hear, I think, in testimony that this is maybe already allowed. I don't think it's not in statute. Maybe it's in rules, and if it's allowed, great. It's not, I don't think it's clear, and I think having it in statute would also, it doesn't hurt a thing, I think. It makes it more clear. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, on section 2, the third part of the bill has really a couple parts. You can see recommendations on line 10 through about 13 on ways to streamline, integrate, shorten. I would encourage all of you, members of this committee, to get on to the Department of Education's website and log into the YTOP and take the practice tests. Take some of those practice tests. I'd encourage you to start with the 4th grade English language arts. No, and I'm dead serious. I mean, take it. And I thought, okay, this baby's going to be 15, 20 minutes. I sat down in my chair one night in my house and I started going, okay, it's 25 minutes, it's 30 minutes. I'm getting really tired of this. And then I had other stuff to do and I quit and didn't finish it. But I encourage you to take some of those practice tests as part of your, I think, role on this committee is to understand that. And I think, so it says, how can we shorten, minimize, streamline, integrate some of this stuff and come up with some ideas? And again, I don't think it's been anything nefarious. It's been so many passionate people who love kids, love what they're teaching. Oh yeah, we should do this. Oh yeah, more. And pretty soon we're here going, how did we get here? And so that's part of that, just to have this conversation about how we can do that. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, we go a little bit farther than federal requirements. Now, we knocked a few of those down a few years ago with the K-1-2 YTOP, right? But there's still a couple high school tests in addition to what federal standards are. I think let's talk about that and let's revisit that. That hasn't been talked about since like 2008, right? At least in my memory of the legislature when we had our little select committee doing all this. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, on line 17, 18, just to find out what does it look like? What is it? How do we ask the federal government? What's the plan to seek a waiver? Because we pay for the ACT for every kid. We're one now, I think probably 15 states that test every junior at the ACT. So most states it's just college bound, but with the Hathaway, this has been part of our deal. But could we substitute the ACT test in place of the secondary YTOP test? So we just have one test in high school. So that was, and the federal government probably say, no, sorry, Charlie, you got to keep your state assessment. But let's at least ask. And that's all that does. So, Mr. Chairman, I think if you flip over to section 3, it says the state board shall incorporate the limitations contained in this paragraph F, this new paragraph we just talked about, and in accordance with the schedule identified under 21-2-304C. That's the standard every 9 years. So it's just, I saw a little fiscal note, administrative impact. I call that death by fiscal note. And I think the idea was we're going to do all these at once. And this, I don't think is going to cost any more at all, because if the state board shrinks the standards, we're still going to have to readjust the YTOP test, meet the new standards, whatever that is. So that's a continual process. So I'm not trying to make us do this in the next 6 months. Mr. Chairman, and perhaps you'll hear on section 2, back on page 4, line 7, that August 1st deadline might be a little aggressive. And so I think you'll hear testimony on that. Maybe we can move that back, or we can divide these subjects, maybe 2 different reporting dates. So with that, Mr. Chairman, as your time's limited, I'll stop talking and stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Representative Harshman. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harshman, Representative Harshman, thanks for bringing this. In our district, we do a lot of this. We're prioritizing our standards through our PLC process. We all know that, right? Professional learning communities. We have many consultants coming in that we're paying through federal funds. What are the Title II and stuff like that. And we have a lot of teachers out there that also go and prioritize and do extra things in the summer. Do you see this as doing a lot of that too, or just continuing that work? And if so, I know how much those consultants are making, $8,000 a day, okay? And we've all seen it. And the Department of Ed, when they ask us to come prioritize, what is it? I believe it's $100 or $150 a day. There's a discrepancy there. So the question is, do you think there could be a fiscal note in this to be working more on these prioritizing these standards?
Go ahead, Representative Harshman, and just so you know that the audience is comprised of Level Up Wyoming, so we have our own cheerleading crowd right now.
You know, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, sir.
Energy is, it's like anything. It's like germs. It's like anything. It's good or bad. It's contagious. And I can just feel the good energy in this room. So I appreciate that. There's a reason when we started going down this, it was because of the federal act, No Child Left Behind. Now that was amended, called the Every Student Succeed Act. But during that time, and I put, I don't know, 6 years of my life probably into this thing, lots of consultants. And so really it shouldn't have been no child left behind. It should have been no consultant left behind. And that's part of the knock on that. But I'll just say this, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm just thinking about first grade teachers. Now, if you're a first grade teacher in a little school and you're the only first grade teacher, you got to make some decisions. Now you're in a 3-unit school, those 3 first grade teachers meet and they go, well, we haven't covered these 3 yet. Well, and there's these decisions being made. What standards you got to cover? So there's all these trade-offs. And that's why I think I should have named it the Save the Elementary Teacher Act. You could rename that title. I think it'd be friendly. But I just think, and again, it's nothing nefarious. I think the state board's going in this direction. But I just think we got to put some sideboards on this. So I can't answer that question, but more narrative for me. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Representative Harshman on the bill? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, you and I have discussed this a little bit. My 2 thoughts are, well, I think everyone's in favor of this at all levels of the state, right? From parents to the governor. And being a former member of the State Board of Education, this is something we were really after. Part of me thinks we should let the Department of Ed and the State Board keep working towards those goals. Let the experts determine how we reduce these instead of just giving a number. In heart, I'm completely for this. I am a little worried about the schedule. I think the State Board will only meet 2 or 3 times before August 1st. I'm not sure how this would be accomplished. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed as well. And your thoughts on the timelines?
Go ahead, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I think, in talking with, and you read it's the state superintendent, the state board in consultation with local districts. And I think it's probably going to take a meeting to come up with some ideas to streamline, integrate, shorten, and minimize. I think these other topics probably of getting to federal minimums and the ACT waiver might take a little more discussion. But I mean, there's probably a couple ways to do it. You could divide that, keep the August 1st for the easier stuff, maybe for the administrative or the assessment stuff, you move it back to October or November. So that's it. That's my thoughts. I would say though, the state board, of course, was a creation of the legislature back in the 1920s and appreciate their work. But recently we've been given the directive, in the Constitution to make sure we set policy so we have, and I guess that's the thing. I mean, to make sure all this is adequate and efficient and really equal across the state. I've thought a lot about that. Do you limit standards? Do you mess with equity? I don't think so. And I think it's just our view of standards, as every little pebble in the sand on the beach, or is it a big rock? And let the local curriculum get after it and local teachers. So that's where I came with it, so.
Further questions? All right, we'll go to public comment. Can we have the department first or elected officials? We're not gonna, we're gonna be late regardless, so.
And Mr. Chairman, while Ms. Maloney is getting settled, you do have the chairman of the State Board of Education online. I don't know if you want to hear from him.
Yep, as soon as we get done with Ms. Maloney.
Okay.
All right, we'll treat you accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Wanda Maloney, and I am the Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education. I bring to you 2 points. The first point is around Section 1, and this is regarding on page 1, looking at the duties of the State Board of Education around the number of standards. And I bring to you the work that the State Board has already begun. So in terms of that, I work also as the liaison to the State Board from the department. And in working with them, one of the things they've done in their resolution is to identify and resolve to reduce the standard load by adopting performance standards. They're also doing this in the advice of working with curriculum directors and teachers. Some of those teachers sit behind me today that have served on this audit committee. So they're conducting an audit of both the math and the science standards. And so that means K through 12. They're looking at the entire scope of standards. And what this group has done in really a relatively short time is look at that scope, and they're also looking at it through the lens of profile of a graduate. So really saying, what is it our students need to be able to do when they graduate from high school? So that's one lens. The other lens that they're looking at is in terms of a classroom teacher. What can a classroom teacher reasonably do in the length of a school day or a school year? So they also have that lens to look through. They're also looking through the complexity of standards. What should come first? What should come second? What should come third? So they really have been looking at it vertically, so K through 12, and then also horizontally, looking at the number of skills. And what this group has been able to do in a very short time is to reduce the number of standards in both math and science by more than 50%. And this information will be coming out to districts for district input, for them to be able to look at these, to offer support, offer questions, offer suggestions. It will then go back to a curriculum directors group. Curriculum directors, I used to be one myself and oversaw that role as the president within the state of Wyoming. And what the curriculum directors do is they look at the whole breadth. And so they look at K through 12. What can our system really take? What makes sense? And so it will go back through that lens, then it will come back through the state board. And the state board will make the final decision to promulgate rules. And you're aware of that process, but that also goes out again for public comment. So there's a lot of lens of work that is happening in that. Secondly, what the State Board of Education is planning to do is then not only stop there, but they're going to tackle the other standards of physical education, health, fine and performing arts, and computer science. And so they are moving at more of a rigorous pace than the 9 years, because they recognize the load that teachers have. What this also means for districts is once they make those changes, districts still would have 3 years to implement those standards. And the reason behind that is if I'm a classroom teacher or I'm working at the district level and you're making changes to my curriculum or to standards, I need to have materials, or I need to have training, or I need to have support in order to be able to roll these out in a way that makes sense. That's why we give districts additional time to implement and use those. So what I would propose to you is that the state board is going at a much rigorous pace than every 9 years because they recognize the load that teachers currently have on their plate. The other point that I would make to you is regarding the report that is due from the department, and that would be on page 4 in section 2. And on page 4 in section 2, it does ask that the superintendent of public instruction provide a report. And what we would ask as a department is that we could provide a report just regarding the reduction of standards. We feel like it is important to make sure that that happens first. And if we look at that first, that will really guide the work that we do secondly in looking at the assessment, looking at accountability, looking at any of the federal requirements. We really can't do that as well as if we could if we saw the reduction of all standards. That would really guide our work in the terms of how we look at the assessment and accountability. So we would ask that we reduce that report to just reporting on the reduction of standards. And we certainly could do that by the August 1st, 2023 date. With that, I would stand for questions.
Is there questions for Ms. Maloney? Chief Maloney, sorry. Go ahead, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm uncertain how the sponsors of this bill and the work of the state board have been coordinated, if at all, and how those two pieces in your mind kind of fit together or don't fit together.
Go ahead, Chief Maloney.
Chairman and Representative Obermuller, I think there have been discussions on that. And I think that we're amenable. I think we all can agree that this needs to happen in terms of the reducing the standard loads. I think we might come at it from a different approach, whereas the department and the board think that we have a process in place. And we're very confident that we can see that through and make that reduction. I would lend the representatives and the anyone else that signed on to this that they answer for their perspective.
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
For those districts who have been prioritizing their standards and have worked a long time and very hard, even through COVID doing all this, let's say we reduce some of the standards and the standards that they have chosen aren't there in your recommendations. Do we do this all over again?
Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Berger, I think that's exactly why we're doing this work, is because every district has chosen to prioritize. And so the teachers in your district have prioritized and selected, and it might look different if it was from Representative Provenza's district. And so then we have an equity issue of what is prioritized in your district could look different. And then are we really delivering the basket of goods the same way to all students? That's part of what's gotten us into this problem, is everyone's tried to reduce. That reduction has created some equity issues. And so what I would say to answer that is that we certainly want the input of the teachers and what you've selected and get that information back to the state board, because certainly they'll consider some of those. And hopefully we're closer than we are further apart.
Okay, committee, as we've been sitting here thinking and talking this, I think what I would like to do is continue the interview or the questions with Ms. Maloney. Then we're going to take the comments from the people out of town so that we can take their public comment. And then everybody that's in town, we're going to pick this back up on Friday and continue this rather than work the rest of this bill. So we'll take all the public comment that from people out of town and then we'll call it quits. So further questions for Chief Maloney? Go ahead, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there anything about this bill that you think impedes the work of the state board in their profile of a graduate effort?
Go ahead, Chief.
Chairman Northrup and Representative Obermuller, I do think that the pace that the state board is taking is needed. And I do think that some of the timelines could impede some of the work. It would slow down the work. The board could continue at the pace that they're going. I would also say that the department is going to continue with this process anyway. We will continue to look at the whole scope of the assessment. We will continue to look at the whole scope of the work around accountability. It will impact it. So, and I also think with the profile of a graduate, there's a lot of moving parts that we need to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for Chief Maloney? Thank you. We'll see you Friday, because I'm sure we're gonna have more questions by then on the same bill, so.
Absolutely, I will be there.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll take public comment from people out of town so that we can. Go ahead.
I think Chairman Furman was waiting on Zoom.
Oh, yes, Chairman Furman, yes, that'd be great from the state board. We should hear from him before we do that, so let's do that.
I'm bringing him in, but I'm not sure if he is available right now. I messaged him to see if he would be ready, so
Okay,
if he is, he'll be able to talk to us, but if not,
I'm here.
okay,
there we go.
perfect.
I wasn't able to chat. That was disabled, so that's why I wasn't able to answer that. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Ryan Furman, and I am currently chairman of the State Board of Education. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent.
Thanks for allowing me to join virtually. I would just like to share additionally to Wanda, the work that the state board has been doing around standards is as I believe it directly aligns to the intent of the House Bill 176. But as Director Maloney pointed out, I do believe the state board is further down the road than this bill, and that this bill in some ways would serve to delay the relief that our K-5 teachers are very much looking forward to. It is through the listening sessions of the state board that we hosted to develop the profile of a graduate, as well as the feedback the RIDE initiative gathered. And frankly, every time the state board heard a presentation from one of Wyoming's award-winning teachers, many of them are with you in the room, that we heard loud and clear that when it comes to standards, we have too many. The state board has hoped that by moving forward with the work that we have been tasked with to prioritize standards at the state level, that this would go far in relieving that pressure and the burden. But the reality is, when it comes to official standards, federal requirements require that if it's in Chapter 10, it's on the Y-top. And so the result of that has been the blueprint that is developed by the department to guide the development of the test becomes the driver of decisions for districts and teachers, and not the standards and not the work of prioritization that has been happening at the state board level and in districts. It is with the completion of the profile of a graduate that the state board realized that we needed to usher in a new paradigm. And that is why we paused the adoption of standards, took a hard look at the process that has been producing the standards to see what we need to do differently. And that's where we started to look for the guidance of curriculum directors around the state, because they have that unique perspective and role of taking standards and turning them into the daily lessons with their educators, and providing the guidance for their educators to do that work in their classroom. I'll just point out, when you have so many standards, you don't have time to meet some of those developmentally those mental health needs of students at times. So I think this relates to those issues. It also doesn't allow teachers to do the innovation and the meaningful, deep lessons that really the state board heard in our profile of a graduate work that the citizens of Wyoming really want to prepare our graduates for. That is why, since last fall, the state board has been embarking on this endeavor to make sure that we have a coherent and viable set of standards. Coherent in that all standards work in tandem across all content areas, all 10 content areas, to support those ideals expressed in the profile of a graduate, and that they're viable, meaning that they are able to be taught in the time that teachers have to teach them. Viability is the key here. What we have now is a wish list of good standards, but what we haven't done is filter those through the time that teachers have to teach them and make sure they're taught to a level of proficiency, as well as able to go deeper and make those learning tasks more meaningful and connect to the community or to other content areas. So in November, the state board proposed a bold idea. We proposed that we took the prioritization that had already happened for math and science and make those official state standards, following an audit to make sure that we didn't leave any big rocks on the beach. That work is just now going out to our districts to get their feedback for both math and science. And we are hoping by February 24th, we are sending that out for official promulgation. If this bill were to pass, we would have to put pause on all of that and go back to that one content standard a year. And it would actually delay the reduction of the standards until the standards came up within that timeline. We are ready to hit go February 24th for both math and science, and then start tackling PE, health, fine and performing arts, and English language. I'll add this. In doing this work, there are some important discoveries that we made. There's always a tension between what is the right amount. How do you balance having robust standards that make sure we continue to have the quality education system we do with having too many, so that you're not allowed to teach them with a depth that allows students to master them. Numbers alone can be really problematic. In looking at the standards for math and science, math are written with a lot more specificity. And so there's more standards. Science are more general, and they have their own unique issues with having science practices and cross-cutting concepts. And so to say science and math both get 4 means that you're using the same tool for 2 different subjects that might need some flexibility. Just right now, and these are still being looked at by districts, science and K-5 came between 4 and 6 standards were identified. So that's really close to this proposed bill. But math is looking around 8 or 10. And again, that's because they're more specific. This bill would make that specificity go away, and then we would worry about the coherence. Our standards that are going to need to be mastered in high school, can they be backwards mapped to make sure that students are learning each key piece as they move through before they reach geometry in high school to have what they need when that course begins? So that's one of the issues that we've struggled with, is how to get the right amount of standards. And that's why we've really relied on our educators and our districts to provide that feedback for what is that viable set of standards. What is the right amount of standards that will fit within a grade band or a grade level to be taught and have students learn? Additionally, when it comes to the next set of standards we need to tackle, English language, we want to make sure that those K-3 literacy supports and standards work in concert. And so again, that's going to maybe need more standards around early childhood literacy, so that we make sure all of the students in Wyoming have those reading skills that they're going to need for all the other learning that they'll have in our system. And then additionally, some standards are meant for exploration and introduction. Those are the ones that we want to take out of the official Chapter 10 rules, but then still provide them to teachers as guidance through the department website. So there's a lot of pieces to make sure that we have a coherent system. But I do want to say that the State Board of Education, working very closely with the Department of Education, is working to try to get this right, to make sure that we have across all 10 content areas a coherent set of standards that allows teachers to teach at a deep level, for students to make sure that they have the best education they can. And when they leave for whatever awaits them after high school graduation, they are ready. That's the work that the State Board has been endeavoring to complete. And with that, I'll pause for questions.
Questions for Ryan from the committee? Go ahead, Vice Chairman Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious if this bill contemplates anything that you aren't currently contemplating in your profile of a graduate.
Go ahead, Ryan.
In terms of focusing the standards to make sure that we have a set of standards that will support the profile, we are very much down the road in doing the work. Like I said, we're trying to hit the February 24th board meeting to move forward with science and with math. We haven't talked about analyzing those assessments, though I do want to point out, once you have a smaller set of standards identified, then the state test will follow along down the road to match that, which would reduce the amount of time students have to take tests, which I'll just point out in third grade, it's almost 3 hours to do just the ELA test as a third grader, which I think is too much. And so we want to make sure we have a small focused set of standards that ensures quality education and not at the expense of the sanity of our teachers or frankly, our students.
Further questions? What? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you seeing maybe districts looking at different graduation tracks as we prioritize their graduation requirements? Let me say that again. Maybe, you know, where we could have a graduate choose a CTE type graduation requirement and another track, you know, an advanced graduation requirement like the follow the Hathaway curriculum. Or am I getting too far ahead?
Go ahead,
Well,
Ryan.
I think what's really important is the profile of a graduate envisions that all high school students are in classes that connects to life outside of the classroom, to their communities and to their future. Right now, CT&E really leads the way in making sure that happens. In some ways, they're a model for the state. We want all students to see how their learning is relevant. And right now, because of the pressure and the weight of the standards and assessment, teachers don't have time for maybe a longer term project that really connects students to their community or to other content areas. And so that's one of the reasons why we've started this work, is to allow the profile of a graduate, which really envisions this bigger, more expansive view of what our high school graduates need, has room to flourish and for districts to innovate to meet the goals of it.
Further questions for Ryan? Thank you, sir. I'm sure we'll be talking with you on Friday.
Okay.
Then, thank you. Okay, we'll take testimony from the ladies up front.
Hi, I'm, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Erin Estes. I'm the 2023 Goshen County Teacher of the Year. And I have been a teacher for 13 years and I teach middle school and high school math. So I know there has been a lot of conversation surrounding the elementary load. I don't teach elementary, but I can speak to the load that I have as a middle school and high school teacher, and it is significant. I'm also a part of the auditing committee that Chairman Furman was talking about. So I've spent some time looking at the math standards on that committee, and I don't want to speak on behalf of that committee, but I do think I have a little bit of perspective that might be helpful. First, I agree with what Chairman Furman said about selecting a specific amount of standards. I feel that that number is a little bit arbitrary. I don't think it fits all of the boxes. For example, in 6th grade math, there are 5 content strands for math. Well, not content strands, there's 5 domains for math. And this bill would have them only teaching 4 content standards. So there'd be one whole domain of mathematics that's not assessed, and I feel that's a problem. So I think if this bill moves forward, I would like to see that there's more of a range or even some wording that takes out the numerical specifications to make it fit. I like the wording that Chairman Furman said of coherent and viable standards instead of a specific number. I also think that the grade breakdown, so if you're looking at page 2, item Romanet I, or Romanet 1 and Romanet 2, it breaks down the grades for kindergarten through 6th. And then on the second part, it says grades 7 through 12. I think it would fit best in our school varieties if it was worded as elementary schools. And then on section 2, middle school, junior high, and high school. So for example, I teach in a middle school building. So I have 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders, and it'd be a lot easier for me to do the work of alignment if the 6th grade wasn't always considered an elementary, but I also know that fits for a lot of the schools in Wyoming. So taking it out of, instead of the grades, considering that as an elementary specification, but I don't know how that would pan out when you actually go to, write the tests and things like that, but it is a small consideration. I believe the other things that I had have been mentioned several times, so I won't mention that again. So I would I would support this. I do appreciate the work that the School Board of Education and the Department of Education have been doing. And this bill prohibits that work. I think that the work that has been done should be honored because I feel like the process has been very helpful and meaningful. And I would suggest that you take out the specific, if the bill gets approved, or moves forward, I would suggest taking out the specific numbering of standards and just find some sort of other wording that relates to having a coherent and viable set of standards. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Erin? Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Next.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Kobe Taylor Logan. I'm the principal at Journey Elementary in Casper, Wyoming. I am born Wyomingite. I've been in education for 30 years. As I have watched the progression of more standards keep piling on teachers, working in an elementary level, pre-K through 5, it is hard to keep our focus. And with the change in SEL, it's even harder. So philosophically, I've always had a belief that children will not learn if their basic needs aren't met. The building that I work in serves 70% free and reduced lunch children. We have a lot of children that can't regulate. We have a lot of trauma. We have all of those things. And when those needs aren't met for those kids, it is really, really hard to get them to sit in a seat long enough to take a test that's 3 hours long. So I do want to share a story that just happened to me the other day with a 4th grade young man who had what we call blow out of the classroom. And he blew out of the classroom several times because math is hard, doesn't like to do it. He shuts down. So I bring him into my office. I do a little pep talk. We do some, just some regulation, positive kind of feedback. And I said, now, sir, you've got to go back and take this test. I don't want to take it, Mrs. Logan. I know I'm not going to do well. I don't want to take it. And I said, you can do well. You will do well. You've got to get your mind into it. So he went back. He took the test in fall and took the test the other day and made 27 points growth. That immediate feedback for him was what he needed to build his confidence to keep wanting to go back. What I find with some of these standardized tests, especially the YTOP, it is such a long turnaround, so they take it in the spring. We can take those benchmarks along the way, but they take it in the spring and there's no follow-up, there's no feedback, there's nothing that provides them any information on how they were as a learner or to even have them own their own learning. So our teachers have gotten really good at looking at all of the modalities, looking at giving immediate feedback as quick as possible. This example I give you of this young man, when he came back down and told me he made 27 points growth, this is a fast bridge test. This is a test we use to just show in building what kind of growth a kid is making. So it keeps us on track. Back in the day, before YTOP, we used to do a test called the NWEA. That gave immediate growth data to teachers, to students, that a teacher could sit down in real time and give student feedback. YTOP doesn't do that. It just doesn't lend itself to do that, especially when you're taking it in the spring. It's a high stakes test, and then you go all summer, and then you meet back in the fall, and those children are in a new grade level. So it's a whole different kind of conversation. What I'm saying is that I am in favor of this bill. I think we're on the right track, but I still think we're dealing with a system that is somewhat broken with the students that we're servicing, and with the amount of standards, it is really hard for a teacher to keep a focus on keeping a differentiated approach for 25 kids, 15 kids, how many kids are sitting in a classroom? And so looking at growth in particular for children, I think is the right direction, and not pigeonholing them into a certain square or a circle, because they're all different. And I would just urge you, we're moving in the right direction with this bill, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done in the educational system to help students feel like they belong and feel like they can be successful every day. So I thank you, and if there's any questions.
Go ahead, Vice Chairman Overmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this bill trying to light a fire under something that's already burning, or
Could
what
you
is this
see
bill?
that?
Go ahead, Colby.
I have had a fire since I was a 5th grade teacher. I have always taught in a Title I school. I've been very passionate about a holistic look at as a child, for every child, and not putting a kid in a certain hole or a square or a peg or whatever it is, that everybody has their own unique way about going about learning. And for me, math was not my thing, but that was never a question on an interview that I had to be a successful leader that I am now. So I look at some of these things that we're asking kids to do, and they're coming back to me saying, well, why do I need to do this?
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, follow up.
A little clarification on my question.
Yeah.
The fire that's burning I'm talking about is the work of the profile of a graduate. All the work that's being done right now is
Yeah.
this bill.
Yeah, I'm super
Sort of
excited
following
about it.
something that
Yeah,
is
I'm
already
super-
happening, or is there any reason for this bill?
Well, I think the reason is that it's heading in the right direction, and I am a part of the work through WDE on the Thrive, and that's all the SEL work.
Yeah.
I have had a focus on SEL, oh gosh, well, classroom teacher, and then as a principal, I could see that these kids were not learning when basic needs weren't met. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't know if I'm answering your question, because I am very passionate about this work, but the profile of the graduate is the right way. We're moving in the right direction.
Okay. Go ahead, Representative.
Then what's a bill that puts us further ahead so that our Board of Education, so we're ahead of them? Does that make sense?
He's asking, does this bill?
Does this bill, because right now, the way I'm hearing, I mean, from what I see too, I know where we're at in our district. We've been working very hard, and it's like, God, we're already kind of there. What's a bill that what's that next step? What do you think?
I would like to see a bill where we are differentiating education for every child, where we're not just saying, this is the standards, these are all the standards, every kid needs to know these standards. And I speak personally as a mom, but also just watching children, like when I don't want to get the math teachers in the room upset with me, but I was not a math kid. Very early on, a 6th grade teacher told my mom that I would never be good at math. However, algebra was my kicking post. Like, I couldn't figure it out. Why are you now putting letters with numbers? What? I don't do algebra every day. Now, my husband, who's a compounding pharmacist, he does algebra every day. He loved it. But to push me on the path to do some of that higher level math that was not needed in the area in which I wanted to go, it was a struggle, which caused me to then constantly question myself as a learner. Was there something wrong with me because I couldn't do algebra? And I think those are the things that kids go through every single day.
Ms. Logan, we are really time constrained. They're up there voting right now, so they're working the water bill. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Alexis Barney. I'm a 4th grade teacher in Ranchester. I was the 2021 Wyoming State Teacher of the Year. I'll be brief and quick, as I know you have other things to do. I was one of the teachers, as with a lot of my colleagues behind me, that joined the audit team of the State Board of Education. And I want to share my perspective as a 4th grade teacher. This was really meaningful work. We worked hard for a couple of days, and we really, really dug deep without a number in mind. What was in mind is viable and guaranteed curriculum that will leverage teacher innovation and also leverage our students, as we know they are the future community members, hopefully, of Wyoming. That's the goal, right? When they graduate, we want them to be our community members. So that was the focus of the work. this bill, maybe this will kind of come back to your question, Representative Ostermuller. This bill, I have a couple of concerns with the fact that, number one, I think it's dangerous to streamline a number of standards when we know the depth and the breadth of our standards is what's important, and being able to teach kids what they need. So I think we run into some dangers, as I'm echoing everyone that has spoken before me, when we put a number on it. And that was not something we did as the work of teachers. And we were really excited about that work. We were reducing, but making them more meaningful. So it's dangerous when we add a number to that. The second thing I want to address is the timeline. I think this timeline will slow the work. As we've heard, I think the State Board of Education has done some rigorous work, and we've been moving with a good pace. And like we've talked about, energy is palpable. Teachers in that meeting felt the energy, and we've been excited to continue to move this work forward. So I do have concerns for this bill for those reasons, because as a teacher, I want to see these changes continuing to move, and I want to keep doing this work. I don't want to keep postponing it and delaying it even one more year. So thank you. I will yield the floor for questions.
Thank you. Questions for Alexis? None. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Chris Bessonette. I am a second grade teacher in Teton County Schools. I really appreciate the intent of this bill to reduce standards. Thank you, thank you. We all seem to be in agreement with that. However, as my colleague has said, I worry about putting that strict number. I think we need to right size. I too was on the math audit committee, and we took the bigger picture of what our students need as profile as they graduate, aligning it to the profile of graduate work and trying to figure out what holes would there be with our current identified performance standards. And we did notice a few holes, and that was with 8 to 10 standards. Yes, we need fewer standards, but I also don't want the pendulum to swing so far from 42 language arts standards down to just 4 as a second grade teacher. Right now in second grade, the standards align to literature, informational reading, writing, language, foundational skills, and speaking and listening. If we reduce those down to just 4, we get 2 standards probably for reading and 2 standards for writing. And I want boulders to work with. I don't want Devil's Tower to work with, right? So I think finding that right size. So I'm hesitant with giving a specific number to standards, but in general, I really appreciate the intent of this bill. And I think we're in the right direction. As Representative Obermuller mentioned, I do believe we are moving in this direction anyways with the state board work. So I'm really happy this is this item of discussion here at the legislature, and I fully support this reduction of standards work. I stand for questions.
Excellent. Questions for Chris? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you. And I guess it's a question and a thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Wyoming has great teachers, and our scores have been outstanding. And I'm really proud of our teachers and the work that they do and our students. And I'm really proud of the state board and the Department of Education. I'm really curious if there's anyone who's going to come up here and say, let's throw away the state board's work and take this bill. That's really where I'm at this. I'm about ready to call for the question. Just, I'd like to hear if anybody thinks that this bill would be better than what the state board is doing. And if they do, I want to know why. So
that may be our next question. So go ahead, Chris.
I would answer no to that. If you need a person on record, Chris Bessonette, I say the state board's work is amazing. It aligns to a whole child view. It prepares kids for their future, either in university level or through other professional careers. So it's great work. It incorporates content knowledge, but in a reduced way that makes teaching, it gives us the ability to be more innovative, which we absolutely need. It gives us the space to create community connections and meaningful education for kids, not just standards, which standards are really what teachers are asking of kids, not what kids actually need. That's why we have kids running out of tests saying, why do I have to answer this? It makes no sense to me. We need an education system that has purpose in the eyes of kids. And I think the state board work aligns beautifully to that.
So let me ask a question. Is anybody here in favor of throwing away the state board and picking up this bill and running with it? Just raise your hands. Get them up there. Okay. That's probably where we are. We'll continue to take public testimony. Committee, if you feel like you need to go up and keep on voting. Water bill's up. They're still talking about amendments. That's
They are
all I
on
can say.
the second amendment right now out of 3 on third reading,
Thank
just so
you.
you guys know where they're at.
Okay, so we haven't missed the vote. All right,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
if I could make a suggestion.
Certainly.
For future testimony, if anybody has anything to add that's different than what we've already heard, otherwise, just come up and say ditto or whatever you want to say.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, committee members and Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to talk. I am going to keep it brief, but I want to share just a little bit to hopefully help with your
Your
perspective.
name?
I am Amy Kay. I'm a science teacher, 7th and 8th grade science teacher in Thermopolis, Wyoming. I've been teaching for about 30 years. I am also on the audit group, so I've been working with those standards for science. Something that decreased numbers of standards will allow teachers to do is to teach skills and critical thinking a little bit more adequately. When there's so many standards on our plate, it's really hard to give time. For example, if I have a lab, I've taken the liberty in my school to kind of decrease a few of my standards so that I can take the kids and give them a driving question where they design and create their own investigation to answer that question. The critical thinking and the collaboration that goes through that process with the kids is invaluable. It takes more time. So then I'm stressed out about, okay, I just spent several more days than I intended to on that lesson because that's what the kids needed. And now how do I make up that time to reach the rest of my standards? So keep that in mind, that it's having less on our plate doesn't take away from what we're doing. It really adds to what we're able to do in our classroom. So with that said, I support this bill, but I think I will reiterate that the dates and the timeline and the number of standards needs to be flexible. And I'd like to see more collaboration between our legislative committee group and the state board and state board of education. I think that collaboration, we're kind of all want the same thing. Why not collaborate and work together to get it done? So with that, I stand for questions.
Questions? Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nathan Tajeski. I'm the middle school principal in Cody, Wyoming. I'm not in favor of the bill, as we've just discussed. If the state board's ahead of it, then great, let the state board do their work. To a question that Representative Berger brought up earlier, what gets out in front of this? Like, what should you guys be thinking of next? I really appreciate the direction and profile of the graduate. I think that the holistic approach to educating a child is the correct approach. I think evaluating schools holistically is the next step. The test scores are a huge portion of our evaluation. When you have other pieces of a school or a district that are just as important, the climate and culture of that district, how good are they at implementing technology? What does leadership and vision look like? Just a couple of things to talk to. I don't think it should come down as heavily onto an individual test score as it does, and that when we evaluate districts and we evaluate schools, it should be a holistic approach, just as we're talking about educating our kids. I stand for questions.
I just would like to comment and say, can you put that in an email and send it to Senate Education? Thank you.
I'll be honest with you, I said the exact same thing in the Senate this morning.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Thank you. Anybody else, questions or comments? Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. More thought and add to that. I appreciate that comment. And we are fully in on this. All educators are. We're going above and beyond. And I appreciate what Mr. Representative Harshman's bringing to us. It brings up a lot of things, and I just want to find a way to say thank you. Right?
Yep.
I know, but yeah, I know where you're at. And,
Ryan, is there a question?
Anyways, the question is, want to give you more money. How do we do that? For the work you're doing. I want to see the money go to us, not the consultants. Thank you. That's all I want.
Anybody else have a question for Nathan?
You feel the same way, Nathan. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I do. I believe that a lot of the unpacking of the standards can happen at the state level, and we can have teachers focus on teaching rather than unpacking standards. There are several states in this country that already do that. And it takes a lot of the work away from the teachers so they can focus on the classroom, their kids, that piece. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Would anybody else like to comment from out of town? Because we're gonna do in town on Friday. Anybody else? Anybody else? Right, we will pick this back up on Friday, right where we are. So,
Thank you.
thank you for coming. Thank you for participating.